All right, 19 after 7, on to this now. A swift end to the war in Ukraine and a lasting peace accord with Russia. That was the wording of a United Nations resolution introduced by the US at the Security Council meeting that happened this past week, but it claimed no blame for the war. The resolution was amended through proposals by France in the General Assembly denouncing Russia as an invader in violation of international law. The Americans subsequently didn't support their own resolution, but South Africa was among the countries that did. It's an extraordinary development as Washington could be seen as, quote-unquote, siding with Moscow. This on the third anniversary of the worst European conflict since the end of the Second World War. That stunning reversal, of course, may also be because you may recall South Africa abstained from a similar vote in 2022 on the first anniversary of the invasion, then ostensibly worried about alienating Russia. On the other hand, even as President Ramaphosa has invited his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky for a state visit, we abstained from Kiev's proposed resolution. So to help us clear the mud, as it were, we've invited Zane Dangor, the DG of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation Department, to help explain. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time once again.
Good morning.
Let me start with perhaps something a little different. We are going to speak about these UN votes, but the latest news is that the lobby group AfriForum is going to be meeting with White House staffers in the Trump administration. Have they engaged with you at all about what they might discuss there, and what's your view on it?
No, they have not engaged with us on what they might discuss, but we've seen the memorandum that they want to discuss. And it's quite a frightening memorandum. We've just discussing Russia, Ukraine, and, the kinds of conflicts that emerge when self-determination outside the context of decolonization is on the agenda. So essentially, if one reads through this, it's, the kinds of issues they're talking about is secession. It's not just about, the Expropriation Act. It's really about the Bella Act. It's about the whole spectrum of redress policies that South Africa has been sort of implementing after many years of not doing this. So the redress issues is really what's of concern with them, but they're also introducing into their discussion, secession and self-determination outside of the context of decolonization, which has across the world been a recipe for conflict and fragmentation of societies. So we are really concerned about this because it's really an attack on the integrity of South Africa and territorial integrity and sovereignty as well. So it's something that we will be engaging with, not with AfriForum, but with the decision makers on the so-called Hill. Yeah. Already I think that there's some of what Democratic Congress people are also equally concerned about what AfriForum is saying. And also
sorry to come in there. They've been at pains to try and walk back some of what you might call disinformation campaigns they've embarked on in recent years whenever they've got together with right-wing conservatives in the US. This is clearly still consistent with what they were doing before.
Yes, I don't think they're walking anything back. I think they're trying to explain that they didn't call for sanctions against the country. They're calling for targeted sanctions against political parties or officials, but essentially still repeating in this memorandum the kinds of issues, the complaints, let me put it in a mild form, that they have around equality issues, redress, equity, and it's still the same forms of disinformation. They're just kind of coating it slightly differently because of the reaction that South Africans had.
How much does that complicate all the diplomatic efforts that have been underway to try and at least give an informed perspective to the Trump administration about what's happening in South Africa at the moment?
Look, I think it does complicate it, but it also, just reinforces what we've been analyzing for a while, is that some of what the Trump administration is putting out is from AfriForum and the misinformation, but if you look at the first few executive orders that the administration did, it really targeted redress policies within the US. And so this is essentially just extrapolating that same agenda into into the international space where they believe that if there's any communities, particularly white communities, that they feel are being victimized, they're gonna take some kind of action against it. So, on this public platform, I do think that we must understand that this platform is fundamentally, the attack on DEI is fundamentally a racist one. And we have to call it out at some point. Yeah.
Well, let's talk matters international now. Following the extraordinary meetings at the UN on Monday, I suppose the question to ask is, will there still be a Ukraine as we know it after all of this? I mean, that's really the sticking point now, isn't it?
Yes, I think, if you look at our stance over the last, almost 3 years, is we've always felt that the use of force by Russia was unlawful because there was no imminent threat by Ukraine. So that's why, even though we may have abstained on some of these resolutions, what was very clear from our side, especially in explanations of votes, is that we needed, one, to move swiftly towards a negotiations towards peace, and a swift peace, but that peace must be subjected to the norms of international law, which says that you cannot acquire land through the use of force. And what we see in the resolution, particularly the one tabled by the US and then amended by France and the EU, basically just package that, because the first part of the US's resolution brought in Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, which for us was refreshing because Chapter 6 of the UN Charter is what we've been sort of talking about for 3 years. Chapter 6 talks about peaceful resolution of conflicts. Chapter 7 talks about the use of force, and we were focusing on Chapter 6. So we really welcome the introduction of Chapter 6, and then we welcome the changes made to that resolution because it brought in what was missing, and what was missing was the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
So how do you deal? Sorry, Zane, to come in there. How do you deal with all of this? Because Donald Trump has said, in fact, Russia has a right to territory that's since been seized because, quote unquote, they fought for that land.
The UN Charter, and I don't want to quote it, but it's one of the key principles, in trying to secure peace and safety of the since the end of the Second World War, has been to put in a very strong prohibition on the acquisition of land through the use of force. That's why South Africa does not recognize Crimea, doesn't recognize Kosovo, because all of these have been acquired through the use of force. And if there's any sense that you could allow this, just imagine the chaos that could have globally. Wherever there's a territorial dispute, there is no longer the need to engage about, is it a legitimate dispute or an illegitimate dispute? You could either offer to buy it through threats,
as we've
seen.
Yeah.
Or you could then use force and say it's the spoils of war. We've gone way beyond the idea that the spoils of war is legitimate. And we're going back into a space before, the kind of consensus post-World War II. We're almost back in 1936.
Yeah, I mean, that's
global politics.
You and I have spoken before about what should happen versus what is happening. And you talk about consensus and the pre-World War II world. There is a sense that multilateralism is nearing its end and that countries perhaps must now negotiate the way forward to serve their own best interests. I mean, we've seen a number of our BRICS partners do much the same. But my final question to you might be, isn't it ironic that Pretoria was lambasted for being perceived to be siding with Russia at a point? And you could argue now that following Monday's voting, we, quote unquote, sided with Ukraine, and still that is against what the US wants.
I think what we've been siding on is on firstly the norms of good relations between states. We're saying Chapter 6, resolve your conflicts through negotiations rather than force. That's why we abstained. And in the same resolutions, we supported the rule of international law. And that informs our vote yesterday. That last resolution just sort of ticked all the boxes for us. It called clear call for peace and within the international legal safeguards. And what we've seen is that we are remaining consistent and others are actually becoming very inconsistent in their conduct in international relations. I don't know if you've listened to the EU saying that why what defines the EU is their consistency. And that's why they seek to build partnerships with South Africa and others, because they see an equal level of consistency.
It's a brave.
This level of inconsistency is something that doesn't just create confusion, but it's actually quite dangerous.
It's a brave new world. Zane Dangor, always appreciate your time. The Director General of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.